What's up, everybody? Matt Kajeski here, back again with the Stokastic DFS channel. And today we are talking college football DFS. It is week 7. We're talking the Thursday slate. 2 games up, 2 games down. Before we get started, make sure to hit that thumbs up button, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell so you know when this and all other content goes live. We're also brought to you today by Prize Picks. And if you've never heard of Prize Picks, they have a couple offers for you guys to take advantage of. They're daily prop-based contests. If you've never heard of Prize Picks, no sharks, no optimizers, no mass entries. You just create lineups of player props. You can do up to 5 players where you can 10 extra entry fee, and you can do this across sports. We're talking college football today. You could do that, mix it with NFL, MLB, NBA, NHL, best time of year. There's literally every sport going on right now. And if you click the link in the video description below, you are going to get 1 free month of Stokastic Plus Platinum and up to a $100 first match deposit bonus when you sign up and make that first deposit with Prize Picks. So click that link, make sure to check them out. And we are going to dive into today's slate. We'll bring you to our data usage tool. No updates from last week, so you have all your game environment stuff up at the top. Vegas data, matchups, seconds per play, that's just a pace metric, how often they're passing, offensive, defensive line interactions. If you have any questions on that, just let me know. But we'll dive right into this. 2-game slate. So the first one we have up is a pretty good game, a Big 12 rivalry game. It's Baylor taking on West Virginia. 3.5 point spread here in favor of Baylor. West Virginia's taking some money. I wouldn't be surprised to see this go to 3. Total's 55, which is okay. Not bad on a 2-game slate. For the skill position players, we'll start with Baylor. Blake Shapen is 6,100. He's actually coming off a really good game. 345 yards. That's the best game of his career, really. He hasn't shown much this season, and part of it's the Baylor offense. They're a little slower and run heavier. 78th in pace, 45% pass rate. But Shapen, he doesn't have a lot of mobility, so he's kind of reliant on his arm. Just 34 rushing yards for him on the year. Averages 223.6 passing yards per game. But, if there's going to be openings against this West Virginia secondary, I think Shapen could be a decent play in DFS. West Virginia does have really weak pass defense. They're allowing 9.1 yards per pass attempt, and they've been had a couple times this year via opposing signal callers. But ultimately, Baylor does want to run the ball. It's the strength of their team. They've got a great offensive line. They're really strong in the trenches overall, and they've moved towards Richard Reese, their freshman back, as their lead back on the team. Reese is only 5,400 here. He's averaging 81 yards per game on 15.4 touches, but he has seen at least 20 touches in 3 straight games now. And he's a player that does have a lot of upside. He's explosive. He's taken on a larger role in the past game. He saw 4 targets last week, which was key because he'd only seen 2 targets all year until that point. All this to say, as a favorite here, Reese is a solid play in the backfield. Behind him, Quaylon Jones is more of a pass-catching back, and Craig Williams, he's just a change of pace right now. Tay McWilliams is still injured. At receiver, we saw Monterey Baldwin return from his injury 2 weeks ago, about 45% of the routes. That jumps up above 70% last week, and he immediately leads the team in targets. It puts up the best receiving game we've seen from any Baylor player all season long. He only has 15 targets this year, but he easily leads the team with 261 receiving yards. That's 65 per game for him because he's been injured. My question is, the targets haven't really been great. He's averaging 3.8 per game. Is this a blip on the radar, or is this something we can expect from Monterey Baldwin moving forward? He is a big play threat, but the concerns are not just target-wise. 3.8 targets per game, that's certainly not going to cut it at 6,500, but this team already likes to run. So is he going to see that voluminous role that, Bryce Ford-Wheaton, Caden Prather, Sam James, the UCF receivers, is he going to climb up to their volume, or is he going to remain this occasional target spike week guy? He's viable in tournaments, but I just have questions here. The actual target leader on the year is tight end Ben Sims. He has at least 5 targets in his last 3 games played. He did miss a game in there too with a head injury, but kind of a low upside option. 34.8 yards per game on 5.8 targets. He's more of just like your filler guy down at 4.3K. Their other receivers on the field are typically Hal Presley and Seth Jones. Not much upside for either of them. Presley's at 36.4 yards per game. Jones at 14.6. Targets just above 3 for both of them. They're nothing but GPP plays. Going to the West Virginia side, tougher matchup for them. Baylor plays solid defense overall, but we have a pass-heavier attack and a slightly faster attack with West Virginia. So JT Daniels is another one of these quarterbacks that I think is viable. You kind of have a clear number one. Daniels and Shapen are 2 and 3 in whatever order you prefer, and then clearly Temple's 4. But talking Daniels, I think you want to play either him or Shapen today. The positives, West Virginia does throw more. Daniels averages 242 yards per game on 36 attempts. The negatives, he's less mobile than Shapen. That's saying a lot. Shapen's he doesn't have 100 yards on the ground yet this year, but JT Daniels is going to give you negative yards. He is negative 40 on the year. He's taken 8 sacks. He's only scrambled twice. They don't design run attempts for him outside of sneaks, so you're likely looking at a range of outcomes between like a negative 10 to 20 yards and 0 yards, which is a positive for Daniels. You just hope that Baylor doesn't put the pressure on him. I have concerns because their D-line is good. But aside from Daniels, who is viable, you've got the backfield. CJ Donaldson is hurt, and he's not going to play in this game. When he went down after just 4 touches in their most recent contest, Tony Mathis and Justin Johnson split the work right down the middle. 12 touches apiece. No real differentiating factor between them. Johnson's been slightly more efficient than Mathis this year on a yards per carry basis, but very little separates them. I think you can kind of play this like, all right, Mathis was the starter heading into the year. He lost his job, but he did get the first crack at it over Johnson. He probably has a slightly better chance of leading the backfield here, but again, he's been inefficient and Johnson's been slightly better. So does Johnson come in and handle a 50-50 role? Is it slightly in Johnson's favor? I think you can make that case as well. When it comes down to price, you are saving $1.2K going to Johnson. It does make a difference on this slate. So if you are playing a West Virginia back, I have a slight price-adjusted preference to Johnson, but I think both are tournament plays. The receiving game is really where I want to get for West Virginia. Because of that pass rate, we have some guys that see pretty solid targets, and they have a main 3. Bryce Ford-Wheaton, Caden Prather, and Sam James. Last week, I guess I should say 2 weeks ago, they're coming off a bye. West Virginia really condensed their targets to these 3. You saw Bryce Ford-Wheaton with 12, Prather with 11, and Sam James with 13. Of this group, there is a clear pecking order. Bryce Ford-Wheaton leads the team with a 30% target share. He's averaging 11.6 targets per game, 82.5 yards. That's reflected in price. So Bryce Ford-Wheaton, if you can get him, is fine. He just has the most secure role. From there, Prather's actually had a really good role too. He has target counts of 6, 10, 8, and 11. That's an 8 target per game average on the year and 9 targets per game over the last 4 games. Now, he's a big, like 6'4" possession receiver, so the yardage isn't great, just 52 yards per game for Prather, but certainly viable at that price. And then Sam James, he's played more of a field stretching role for this team. He averages more yards than Prather. Again, it's 52 per game for Prather, 61 for James, but you've seen less targets for James. 6.4 targets per game to 8 targets per game for Prather. However, that did normalize a little bit last week. Again, the targets last week specifically were 12 Bryce Ford-Wheaton, 11 Prather, 13 James. So that good involvement kind of explains why James comes in with a higher price tag. I'd rather just save with Prather, but ultimately I'll probably play a decent amount of these guys. Behind them, they use 4 wide a fair amount. When they do so, it's Reese Smith. 2.6 targets per game for him. He's more just a GPP flyer when they're in 4 wide. When they use a tight end, it's usually Michael Laughlin. He's questionable for this game, which means Brian Polendi could start. Brian Polendi, he played about 70% of the routes last week, a little north of that. 2 targets, so not really involved, but Polendi will be the tight end if O'Laughlin misses, but O'Laughlin should be the guy if healthy. We'll learn that pregame. Both are tournament options. Second game, we have Temple taking on UCF. This is a 23.5 point spread in favor of UCF. They have a monster team total on the slate of nearly 35 points. The total in the game is 46, so we're not expecting a ton of points. We'll start with the Temple side. They've actually been good on defense. Only 5.6 yards per pass, that's allowed. 3.8 yards per carry allowed. They've played better defense than UCF, but maybe that's why the total in this game was a little lower. At quarterback, you have E.J. Warner taking over most of the snaps now. He's played a little bit with Quincy Patterson. Patterson comes in on like these gadgety type plays. So in clear passing downs, it's Warner. Dewan Mathis is playing receiver now, so I wouldn't expect to see him. But overall, E.J. Warner, 201.5 yards per game. That's on 27 attempts, somewhat limited by the rotation earlier in the year. Not mobile, only 2 rushing yards so far. They use Patterson on those designed attempts usually. He's the lowest upside guy on the slate, and it's largely because Temple has an 11-point team total. Again, clear tiers here. UCF signal caller 1. We'll talk about him in a sec. Then Baylor, West Virginia. Then EJ Warner 4th. In the backfield, we've seen a little bit of a changing of the guard lately. Darvon Hubbard has started to work ahead of Edward Sadie. That's important because he's cheaper. He's $3,500. But ultimately, this is a really low upside situation. Hubbard did touch the ball 12 times in the last game, including 6 targets, which is big for him in this role change. But we're still talking about really low projected players for Temple. I think he's mainly just a GPP option. Sadie, if you think the backfield goes back in his direction, but he's kind of in the doghouse right now. Hubbard's averaging more yards per game on fewer carries. So that explains everything you need to see. Jakari Norwood comes in as a change of pace occasionally, and then Patterson's always siphoning off a few on those designed attempts, but really low upside options. In the pass game, you have a clear 2 here with Jose Barbin and Adonica Sanders, and Temple throws the ball 52% of the time, so they actually get a lot of volume off to these guys. Jose Barbin is averaging 6.6 targets per game, 63.4 yards. It's actually pretty good at his price, $3,900. He comes in ahead of Adonica Sanders in targets and yards, so I'm not sure why he's less expensive. But ultimately, they're both pretty close in price. They're both playable. Adonicus could give you some leverage. I'm sure people will just save with Barbin. Their wide receiver 3 is typically Ian Stewart. Now, he's not quite a full-time player compared to Barbin and Sanders, but his route rate is pretty good here overall. So I think you could play Stewart at the stone minimum if you need a min-price guy. He had a 60% route rate last week, but this kind of ebbs and flows a little bit here with some of the other players getting involved occasionally. Tight end, we saw a changing of the guard or something of that sort. Overall, Jordan Smith had been the tight end to start the year. And then David Martin Robinson, he came back from injury 2 games ago. He immediately saw 6 targets in both of the games, and then his route rate jumped from 48% in his first game back to 89% in his second game back, coming directly at the expense of Jordan Smith. So I would just try to find the money, just play David Martin Robinson. If you're considering Smith, DMR is 300 less. You should have no problems getting him. I think he's a decent tournament option too. And to close this out, we'll go to UCF, the best offense to target on the slate. We have the number 1 quarterback overall among the 4 in John Reese Plumlee. He is $8,500. You just pay that salary, in my opinion, outside of tournaments. I think the only other viable construction is maybe like Daniels and Chapin and hope that game shoots out. It could. It has a 10-point total above this one. But anyway, Plumlee really mobile. He has 431 yards on the ground this year. That's just shy of 100 yards per game. He's awesome as a rusher. Leaves a little bit to be desired as a passer, but still averaging 232 yards through the air on 29 attempts. He's just hit or miss there. In the better games, he struggled. The more difficult games, I should say, but pretty good overall for Plumlee. He's just flat out the number 1 QB. In the backfield, Isaiah Bowser averages 17.6 touches per game for a horrifically inefficient 58 yards on the ground and a few more as a receiver, but holy smokes, he's going to lose his job if he's going to be this bad. They continue to run him out there, but we've seen the timeshare slowly work away from him. Johnny Richardson's gotten more involved. The problem with Richardson is just size. He's never going to take on the full workload because he's a scat back based on his profile. And we've seen that he's the leader among running backs in targets. He's 15 on the year, which is going to be his role. He'll handle a few more carries there. The main concern with Bowser is we've now seen RJ Harvey come into the mix. He has carry counts of 8, 11, and 7 on the year. No targets for him, but he is playing a role on base downs. And if the game gets anywhere remotely out of hand, you're going to see more Harvey too. If anything, Harvey and Richardson are just kind of headaches for those of you that wanted to play Bowser at that monster workload he had early in the season. But Harvey's the stone min. He could be a pivot off of whatever cheap player you wanted to take earlier, an Ian Stewart or a tight end from Temple. He could be just a guy you go to instead with the touchdown equity. In the receiving game, very clear here. UCF is using Javon Baker and Ryan O'Keefe and no one else really. Baker, he comes in slightly cheaper than O'Keefe, and I'm not sure why. He has 395 receiving yards. O'Keefe just has 280. The targets, Baker is at 43. O'Keefe's at 34. So this is another spot where the better receiver is slightly cheaper, but you can play both. They're both really involved. 8.6 targets per game for Baker, 7.0 for O'Keefe. Both have excellent upside. I'm fine playing either one with a preference to Baker. Wide receiver 3, Kobe Hudson's kind of been benched now. 4 targets in the last game. That's the most he's had all year. but his route rates have plummeted. He dealt with an injury midseason. I'm not sure if they get better because of how bad he's been. When you look at the routes overall, last week he came in with a 40% route rate. That's just, it's terrible. I don't know what else to say. They're playing a little bit of Jalen Griffin. They're mixing in Xavier Townsend. They're using tight ends a little more. They're just not using Kobe Hudson quite as much. Now, he's still viable in tournaments because he does have games with route rates above 90%, but it's rough for the former Auburn leading receiver. My goodness. Tight end is a mixture between Gamble and Holler, probably not playing either of them. But that'll do it for us with Stokastic and the Week 7 Thursday main slate. If you guys have questions, let me know. Let me know what you think about the plays and the breakdowns. Would love to hear it. Otherwise, you can find me on Twitter at Matt_Gajeski if you'd like to reach out. We'll be back tomorrow with the Friday slate and Saturday, so make sure to check those videos out as well. Until then, good luck, everybody. We'll see you then.